BOCA stands for Building Officials and Code Administrators International. It was a professional organization that developed model building codes used throughout the United States, primarily in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. While BOCA itself no longer exists as an independent entity, its legacy lives on through the international codes, or I-codes, developed by the International Code Council, or ICE. The ICC acquired BOCA, along with other regional code organizations, in the early 2000s, consolidating various model codes into a single, unified system. The I-codes are now the most widely adopted building codes in the United States. With respect to hallway lighting, the specific requirements you mentioned regarding luminaire height likely originate from either the BOCA National Building Code, which was the code BOCA developed before being acquired by ICC, or from a more recent edition of the International Building Code, or IBC, which is now the standard. While the exact wording and specific height requirements may vary slightly depending on the edition of the code adopted by a particular jurisdiction, the general principle remains the same. Hallways are considered means of egress, which means they provide a safe path for occupants to exit a building in case of an emergency, such as a fire. As such, it is essential to keep these pathways clear of obstructions and hazards that could impede egress or cause injury. One potential hazard is low-hanging luminaires. If a chandelier or other lighting fixture hangs too low, it could pose a risk of head injury, especially for taller individuals or those who are unfamiliar with the building. Furthermore, lower-hanging fixtures could obstruct the path of travel for people with disabilities, such as those using wheelchairs or walkers. To address these concerns, building codes typically specify a minimum height clearance for luminaires installed in hallways and other means of egress. This minimum height is often expressed as a certain number of inches or feet above the finished floor. You mentioned a potential discrepancy between the print, which specifies a luminaire height of 18 inches off the suspended ceiling, and BOCA, which you believe states that luminaires cannot be below 7 feet 5 inches in a hallway. It is important to clarify a few points to resolve this apparent conflict. Firstly, it is crucial to verify the specific edition of the BOCA National Building Code or the International Building Code that is in effect in the jurisdiction where the assisted living project is located. Different editions of the code may have different requirements. Secondly, it is important to understand that the minimum height requirement typically refers to the distance from the finished floor to the lowest point of the luminaire. In other words, the entire luminaire, including any decorative elements or hanging chains, must be at least the specified height above the floor. Thirdly, the height requirement applies to the finished floor, not the suspended ceiling. In your case, the print specifies the distance from the suspended ceiling, which is an intermediate surface. To determine whether the proposed installation complies with the code, you need to calculate the distance from the finished floor to the lowest point of the luminaire. This calculation would involve adding the distance from the finished floor to the suspended ceiling to the 18 inches specified in the print. For example, if the suspended ceiling is 8 feet above the finished floor, then the lowest point of the luminaire would be 8 feet plus 18 inches, which is equal to 9 feet 6 inches. In this case, the proposed installation would comply with the 7 foot 5 inch minimum height requirement. However, if the suspended ceiling is only 6 feet above the finished floor, then the lowest point of the luminaire would be 6 feet plus 18 inches, which is equal to 7 feet 6 inches. In this case, the proposed installation would still comply with the 7 foot 5 inch minimum height requirement, but it would be very close to the limit. It is always a good idea to provide some additional clearance to avoid any potential issues during inspection. Keep in mind that there may be other relevant code requirements that could affect a luminaire installation. For example, the code may specify requirements for the type of luminaire allowed in hallways, the spacing between luminaires, or the amount of light that must be provided. Additionally, the National Electrical Code, or NEC, contains requirements for the installation of electrical equipment, including luminaires. These requirements cover issues such as wiring methods, overcurrent protection, and grounding. Here are some specific sections of the NEC that may be relevant to the installation of chandeliers in hallways. Firstly, Article 410 covers luminaires, lamp holders, and lamps. This article provides general requirements for the installation of luminaires, including mounting methods, wiring connections, and clearances. Secondly, Section 410.16 covers luminaires in specific locations. This section includes requirements for luminaires installed in damp or wet locations, as well as those installed near combustible materials. Thirdly, Article 314 covers outlet boxes, device boxes, and pull boxes. This article provides requirements for the installation of boxes used to support luminaires and make wiring connections. Fourthly, Article 250 covers grounding and bonding. This article provides requirements for grounding the metal parts of luminaires to ensure electrical safety. In addition to these NEC requirements, there may also be local codes or ordinances that apply to the luminaire installation. It is important to check with the local building department or electrical inspector to determine which codes and standards are in effect in your area. To ensure compliance with all applicable codes and standards, it is recommended that you consult with a qualified electrical contractor or engineer. These professionals can review the project plans, perform calculations, and inspect the installation to ensure that it meets all requirements. They can also provide guidance on selecting appropriate luminaires and wiring methods. When selecting luminaires for hallways, it is important to consider not only the height clearance requirements, but also the lighting level requirements. Hallways must be adequately lit to provide safe passage for occupants. The Illuminating Engineering Society, or WISE, recommends minimum lighting levels for various types of spaces, including hallways. These recommendations are based on factors such as the age of the occupants, the type of activities performed in the space, and the desired level of visual comfort. In addition to lighting level, it is also important to consider the color rendering index, or CRI, of the luminaires. CRI is a measure of how accurately a light source renders the colors of objects compared to a natural light source. A higher CRI indicates better color rendering. For hallways in assisted living facilities, it is generally recommended to use luminaires with a CRI of 80 or higher to ensure that occupants can easily distinguish colors and see objects clearly. Finally, it is important to consider the energy efficiency of the luminaires. Energy-efficient luminaires can help reduce energy consumption and lower operating costs. Light-emitting diode, or LED, luminaires are a popular choice for hallways because they are very energy efficient and have a long lifespan. They also produce very little heat, which can help reduce cooling costs. In summary, the installation of chandeliers in hallways of assisted living facilities is subject to various code requirements, including minimum height clearance, lighting level, and electrical safety. To ensure compliance with all applicable codes and standards, it is recommended that you consult with a qualified electrical contractor or engineer. By carefully considering these requirements, you can ensure that the luminaires are installed safely and effectively, providing adequate lighting for occupants while minimizing the risk of injury or property damage. Before I conclude, let's briefly discuss how to interpret and apply code requirements related to luminaire height. The key is to understand the intent of the code, which is to ensure safe egress and prevent hazards. Always refer to the specific edition of the code that is in effect in your jurisdiction, as requirements may vary. Pay close attention to the definitions of terms such as finished floor and means of egress. These definitions can help you interpret the code correctly. When measuring luminaire height, always measure from the finished floor to the lowest point of the luminaire. This includes any decorative elements or hanging chains. If the luminaire is installed in a suspended ceiling, you need to calculate the distance from the finished floor to the luminaire by adding the distance from the finished floor to the suspended ceiling to the distance from the suspended ceiling to the luminaire. If you are unsure about any aspect of the code, consult with a qualified electrical contractor or engineer. They can provide expert guidance and ensure that the installation complies with all applicable requirements. Remember that code requirements are not static. They are constantly evolving to reflect new technologies, best practices, and safety concerns. Stay up to date on the latest code changes and ensure that you are using the most current edition of the code. By following these guidelines, you can help ensure that luminaire installations are safe, compliant, and effective. That concludes our discussion of BOCA code requirements for hallway lighting. I hope this information has been helpful. If you have any further questions, please consult with a qualified electrical contractor or engineer.